Hey y'all, welcome back to our story series. It is so good to be getting back to this. As you may notice, I am no longer pregnant. We have had a sweet little baby boy since the last video that I did. We have just loved spending the last 3 weeks now just cuddling him and adjusting to our new family, and it's been an awesome season for us. It's been really exciting. But I've been so excited to dive back in and get back to this series. We are on chapter 4 now of our story. I'll be linking above to the 3 previous videos, because if you missed those, please watch those first, because this piece will make no sense. Each one picks up where the last one left off. But first, I just wanted to say thank you. Over these last 3 weeks, I have gotten so many emails and comments, both on the blog and on social media, about this series. And it's been so encouraging for me, because this literally is my favorite thing that I've ever done in 3 years of blogging. For me, the blog has always been personal. And so sharing our family's story is exciting, and just sharing what God's done in our 7 years of marriage as a family so far has been really powerful. But hearing that you guys love it and are ready for it to start back, and that it has resonated with you, that it has encouraged you, is huge, and is just so affirming for us and such a blessing to us. So I'm so thankful to hear that. You know, other people's stories played such a role in shaping ours and in giving us direction. You know, God used so many other stories to kind of lead us on this adventure. And so hearing that He's using ours in some of your lives are amazing. And it's just cool to see that, you know, He's going to do the same thing with your stories. He's going to use them to influence and kind of lead and guide other people. So this has been a powerful thing to do, and I'm so excited to continue it and dive back in and share some really exciting pieces of our story in the coming weeks. So I left off in chapter 3 talking about the downtown cottage. We had bought that house in this little downtown neighborhood. We had renovated it. During that season, I had started the White Buffalo, had left my full-time teaching job to come home and build the White Buffalo as much as I could, because Rosie was on her way, and it was our goal to build something that I loved but also could stay at home and be her mom. And so that was a really exciting season. I was finally doing my 2 dream jobs, or at least building to one, right? I was doing a job, a creative job at home that I loved, and I was about to be a stay-at-home mom. And those were 2 things that I'd always hoped for, and to see those starting to happen was so exciting. But it was also a stressful time, because we were looking at having to sell that house. We had been there almost 2 years. The 2-year mark hit the end of February in 2015. Rosie was due at the end of January. So we knew that we were going to have to sell that house. Things were still super tight. Coming home obviously made those tighter in some ways, but that was something we felt so affirmed that we were supposed to do, that we were willing to do that, to take that kind of pay cut for me, and just trust that God was going to provide. You know, we knew we were selling the house, so that was going to give us some relief. But for us, selling the house, it was bigger than that. It was bigger than just, oh, I took a little pay cut to come home from teaching and blog, so we need to sell it. Selling it had been the plan before I ever came home, because we still had this insurmountable amount of debt that needed to be paid off. And while selling the first house did put a kind of chip away at that with a chunk, we still had so much left that we needed to sell the house to pay for. You know, I said in the first, or maybe the second video, that selling that first house and moving into the downtown cottage was huge for us, because it gave us that first little tiny taste of freedom. While we still had a lot of debt left, we had this taste of what living free might look like for our family, and that was something we felt so affirmed in pursuing. So even though it was going to be crazy, we were excited to sell the downtown cottage and do it all over again, and put that profit to debt. You know, that was a really interesting time for us too, because I think as this started to not be a one-time thing that we were going to sell and renovate it again, it was becoming a pattern. Our friends and people around us clearly saw, and we were choosing a really crazy time to do it. A lot of people knew we were planning to sell and renovate again sometime around having Rosie. And so I think it was a hard season in some ways, because we started to get some sort of, maybe questions is the right way to put it. At the time, it felt like criticism and judgment to me, coming from just people around us who didn't understand the vision. A lot of our close friends, I think, were super supportive, but a lot of people who heard what we were doing, I think, were like, what are y'all doing? You're having a baby. And it was really good time for us to kind of process and realize that God is calling us to make some radical different decisions. And not everyone's going to understand that, because everybody's stories look different, and that's okay. And that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision for us. So there was a lot of processing that led into selling that house. So let's dive right into Rosie Cummings. She was born on January 26, 2015 at the downtown cottage. We had a home birth, as many of you may have read. Another one of those decisions that we felt super affirmed in, that we prayed so much over. We had a lot of friends and people around us who had made similar decisions, so for us it wasn't that crazy. But we realized that to the world it is a little crazy in the modern way that birth takes place. And so maybe that was good practice for us with where God was leading us, to be okay with making decisions that were radical but completely right for us. Rosie was born at home. It was the most wonderful, miraculous, joyous day, and still is probably one of the two now that we've had Dax, biggest days in our life, and it was amazing. When Rosie was 3 days old, we got an email from a friend at church who actually did not know that we had just had a baby, but knew that we were planning to sell our house sometime in the 2015 year, was what she knew. And she's a realtor in the area, and she emailed us and said, hey, I have a potential buyer for your house. Do you still want to sell it? We had to laugh at God's timing, because we literally had a 3-day-old baby and we were getting an email about someone wanting to buy our house. And it would just, you know, sometimes God's timing is hilarious to us, but it always ends up better and more perfect than we could have imagined. Before we got that email, we had processed that selling and renovating immediately after we had a newborn, so at the end of February, when we could sell, based off of that 2-year tax rule that I talked about in another video. So if we followed that timeline, you know, that we would have been selling and trying to renovate when Rosie was like a month old, and that just was not smart, and we knew that. And so we had run a bunch of numbers and decided that even though it was tight, we would wait and sell and move and renovate in the summer. So yeah, we would have like a 5-month-old baby, 4-month-old baby. But for us, the taste of that freedom and the money that would be freed up from doing that was worth the upheaval and stress that that might cause. Moving towards freedom for our family was worth that. So we had decided we'd wait till the summer, and then we get that email when Rosie's 3 days old. She had a buyer that was desperate to be in our neighborhood. I told you in the last video that when we bought that house, this neighborhood had kind of gone crazy. It's one of the closest neighborhoods to downtown, and people just kind of saw the potential in it. Well, that had only increased while we lived in the downtown cottage. Investors were all over this area. And it had become a really desirable place that people were targeting this area wanting to live in. While we lived there, actually, this neighborhood was named the hottest real estate market in Greenville because at the rate things were being flipped and the values were increasing. So this buyer of our realtor friend was desperate to live in this neighborhood, this exact location. And our realtor friend had told her that we might be selling our house. She had seen it on the blog and she wanted to see it in person. She was very interested in buying it. So we talked about it, and Chris responded and said, hey, we are definitely still going to sell our house this year, but we had a baby 3 days ago, and so we've decided we can't move before June. We can't do that to our family, but we're willing to let her see it if that time frame would work for her. So the realtor responded and said that yes, that time frame would work. They wanted to see it. So when Rosie was 6 days old, We loaded her up for her first car ride ever and drove her around our neighborhood while that family toured our house and saw it for a showing. Thankfully, we had a lot of family in town to help with Rosie and to meet her, so they cleaned and did everything, and all we had to do was load her up and go on a little car ride to let them see the house. But we laughed the whole car ride, just thinking we have a 6-day-old baby in the back of our car and we are having a showing on our house. And the timing was just hilarious to us, but so clearly God ordained, because that night we found out that they wanted to make a full priced offer, which blew our mind. Like I said, you know, this neighborhood was flipping like crazy, but it's a transitional neighborhood, and so in a neighborhood like that, coming up with an asking price can be hard because the values are increasing so rapidly. There aren't always comps to support what you should be asking. You know, if you sell a house now in a month or two, you could probably ask more for it. And so it was just a really crazy season for this neighborhood. And so we had come up with a price that we felt like was very fair, but was also kind of at the top of what was happening at that point, which houses that sell now we're seeing are always at the top of what's happening because it's just increasing that fast. So we set that price, allowing room to negotiate. They gave us a full priced offer. Beyond that, they said that instead of waiting to the summer when we wanted to move to close, they were willing to close, and actually wanted to close as soon as we were able to at the end of February, and then allow us to rent back until June 1st. So in case we weren't already clear that God was doing this and that He had set that up, He'd made that so obvious, just another little kind of check mark in the God box that, like, yes, I'm doing this, because that was a perfect scenario for us. We had been really concerned, even though we felt so affirmed in this plan, about how we were going to make it all work, because with Rosie, we were not willing to live through another renovation, right? We needed to move into a finished house. But with our financial situation, we could not buy, much less renovate a new house until we'd closed on that one. And so we were going to have this season where our family with a newborn was displaced. And by them allowing us to go ahead and close, have the money to put toward a new house, and then rent back for several months, they had taken care of that without us even having to ask for it. So that was amazing. As soon as the house was under contract, we immediately began scouring our neighborhood for the next house. We had prayed a lot over it and just felt 100% affirmed that we were supposed to stay in this neighborhood. We did not even look or consider another neighborhood, even though it felt literally impossible to compete with investors and get a house here pre-renovation. Flipped houses were available, even though they were selling fast. Surprisingly, we didn't consider even looking somewhere else at that point, because we just felt so affirmed in our purpose here. You know, we had made a community here. In the 2 years we lived there, we had made friends, wonderful friends, and we just felt like so confident that God was saying, you're not done here. So we were very stressed. But we held out hope that He was going to provide a house here. As a new mom, it was very stressful for me to think about, like, I have nowhere to take my newborn baby. We are going to be out of this house on June 1st and have nowhere to go. But yet God's saying, wait on me and stay here. And that was a kind of a tough situation that really we had to say, do we trust that this is really what God's saying, even though nothing's being provided yet? And it was hard, and there were hard emotional days, but we did. We waited on that. And in mid-March, about 2 weeks after we had closed on that house, we scoured this neighborhood every day. I mean, we rode down every street every day, hoping to see a sign in the yard or something. And Chris found a house, a little bungalow on this street down near the park, this quiet street that we loved with big, beautiful trees. And they were putting a for rent sign in the yard that day. And this had been a rental for a long time, which was important for us. Really, with us feeling a mission and a purpose in living here and living alongside our neighbors, the last thing we wanted to do was run anybody off. So we were very determined that we were not going to approach people that lived here and say, hey, we want to buy your house, because to us that said, we want your house more than we want you in the neighborhood, and that was not okay. So we were looking at vacant houses, we were looking at rentals, houses for rent, which narrowed the window down of houses we could get significantly. But we found this little bungalow that had a for rent sign in the yard. It had been a rental for a long time, but the renters had left and they wanted new renters. And Chris had the idea to make them an offer, call and see if they were open to an offer. The worst they could say was no. So he did that. We came up with an offer that we felt good about. We made the offer, and they turned it down. And it was so sad because we really felt like this might be it. So we kept looking and we kept looking and we kept looking. And for the next several weeks, again, no prospects, nothing. And we could not get this little bungalow out of our mind. We'd fallen in love with it. It was still for rent. They had not gotten renters yet. And so Chris came to me and said, what do you think about making a little bit higher of an offer? I think that we have room on that for it to still be a great investment, but maybe they'd be willing to take that. And so we did. We made a higher offer, and that time they took the offer. So we got under contract on this little bungalow down near the park. Very exciting. We thankfully had decided to keep the profit on the last house to put into the next house instead of paying down college debt, because for us that is still debt paid off. That was a wash versus getting a new mortgage, and then we had cash to work with, which made us more competitive with investors in the area. So thank goodness we had done that, because we were running out of time. We got this house under contract at the beginning of April. We were supposed to be out of that house June 1st, and so we already knew when we got it under contract, the scale of this renovation was not a 2-month renovation. It was bigger than that. But thankfully, because we had the cash, we were able to close within 10 days on this house. We closed April 15th, 2015 on what's now our Buffalo bungalow that we love, and immediately just flung ourselves into furious planning, furious renovations. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the renovation process of this house that was crazy. Made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot on this one, and I'll break all of that down for us. But right around the time we got this under contract, like I said, we are not going to be remotely done by June 1st, probably not even half done with this house. What are we going to do, right? It's going to be to a point we can't live in it with the scale of what we knew we would be doing here. Some of y'all may remember this house was 750 square feet. We added on 1,200 square feet and gutted the entire existing house, reworked the entire floor plan. And we knew, while all of that was not firmed up yet, we knew that this was going to be the biggest renovation we'd ever tackled. And so we reached out to our landlord at the time, the new owners of the downtown cottage that were letting us rent back, and told them the situation and just said, hey, you know, it took us a few months to find a house. Here's our situation. Do y'all have any flexibility on your move-in date? And if not, we understand. It's your house. But y'all, as God always does, something crazy happened. And she said, hey, you know what? I've actually decided to hike the Appalachian Trail for the entire summer for 3 months. And so that house was going to be sitting empty, and I was going to be paying the mortgage on an empty house. I can let y'all stay there until September 15th, and y'all can pay the mortgage for me, and then someone's in the house, and that's great. And it blew our mind, you know, just like that. We had 3.5 more months. And this reno took every single bit of that. There's no question with the scale of it, which I'll talk about some next week. But God was just setting everything up perfectly for us again. And, you know, I want to be careful saying that, because I don't think that, you know, as believers, life's going to be perfect. I don't think things are always going to be perfect. And in our life and in this journey, it surely hasn't. There's been many things that were not perfect, that didn't go our way. You know, I'm obviously talking about all of the high points of ways that God came through in huge ways for us, which He did. But there were so many things along the way that were major learning experiences for us. Houses we didn't get that we were devastated because we knew they were perfect, you know, things like that. And this next renovation process, the Buffalo bungalow, I'm going to talk a lot about some things that, big obstacles that we did face, mistakes that we made, things that God took away, you know, lots of that. But God did come through in so many amazing ways, in huge ways, as you've heard, but also in some of the smallest ways that are just like He was saying, hey, I love you guys, and I'm here, and never letting us forget that He was writing this story. Now it's amazing looking back, because at the time when we sold that house and we're starting on this house, and how He set all of that up, you know, we had no doubt He was writing it, but we didn't really understand what he was writing our story for and what the purpose was. We thought we did at that time. You know, we knew that it was this story for us and this adventure for us was to get out of debt so that our family was not enslaved for the next 30 years to this that would cripple every decision we would ever want to make. It would cripple us being able to do what God was calling us to do. You know, we felt like our family we feel like everyone is called to do. We felt like our family was called to live free from many things, but one of those was the bondage of debt, and we knew that. But the why we were supposed to do that was still a little cloudy. Looking back, I realized that our why was still pretty self-focused. It was very focused on our family. And in the Buffalo Bungalow, in the last year, God has done crazy things in our hearts and our souls and our lives. And I can't wait to share that in the next video of how he really has completely torn down and rebuilt our very comfortable, self-focused vision of the future for our family, our story, and our purpose, and his bigger story that he's writing. You know, our purpose for getting debt-free and living free as a family has become so much bigger than ourselves in this last year, and God's done that totally. He's revealed that to us, and we're now at a really exciting place where we can sort of envision some of the things he's leading us to. So I'm excited to dive in chapter 5 with the reno of the Buffalo Bungalow and how God totally kind of wrecked our comfortable Christianity and the role that this adventure plays in that, and rebuilt that into something that is more kingdom focused and glorifying to him. So thank you guys for watching. I'm so excited to continue sharing this with you. We have a couple more chapters of this story that I'm going to share in the coming weeks before we finish. For now, our story will always be added to in the future. God's never done writing our stories, but I'm excited to share with you some things to come because they're our favorite parts of the story so far. So I'll be back next week with chapter 5. Thanks, y'all.